You opened ChatGPT again last night, the prompt box sitting there empty, cursor blinking, and you typed nothing, closed the tab, and told yourself you would do it tomorrow. And you think the problem is discipline. But your brain is not stuck because you lack willpower. It is stuck for a reason you have never been told. That reason is not what you think it is. Every week your script stays blank, you lose watch hours you cannot get back. And your brain has a specific reason for keeping you here, but it is not the one you think. You already know what to do. That is not the problem. The script is not waiting on research. You have a topic. You may even have a low competition keyword saved in vidIQ from last week. And while that keyword sits there, another creator in your niche is publishing the video you planned, picking up the subscribers you needed to hit your first 1,000. And yet the ChatGPT tab is still open right now, cursor blinking in an empty prompt box, nothing typed. You have been in that tab. You know exactly what that feels like. And every time you close the laptop and tell yourself tomorrow, there is a small voice that calls it what it is, not a scheduling problem. A you problem, that is the belief. And it is wrong, not slightly wrong, structurally wrong. Because the thing you have been calling laziness or weakness or not wanting it enough, that is not what is happening. The freeze is real. The blank prompt is real. The closing of the laptop is real. And none of it looks like someone who does not care. It looks like someone who cares so much it has stopped them completely. So if it is not laziness and it is not discipline and caring more has not fixed it, what actually is it? Here is what your brain is actually doing in that moment. The anterior cingulate cortex, the region responsible for conflict monitoring and error prediction, has logged this action, opening that script as a high-stakes identity event. And the moment it did that, your amygdala treated it the way it treats any high-stakes threat. It initiated a shutdown, not confusion, not laziness, a protection response. The technical name for what is happening is threat appraisal misclassification, first documented by psychologist Mark Seary at the University of Buffalo. And it means your brain has sorted writing a faceless video script into the same category as standing on the edge of a cliff. This pattern shows up equally in high performers, researchers, executives, experienced creators, people with every reason to feel capable. The misclassification is not random. It is proportional to how much you care. The clearer the goal, the more specific the path, the higher the perceived failure cost, and the stronger the shutdown signal. Your brain is not broken. It is working exactly as designed. The problem is the design cannot distinguish between a real threat and a blank Google Doc with your name on it. You are being protected from something that cannot hurt you. And the protection itself is what is costing you everything. There are 3 specific tools that dismantle that protection response, and every one of them comes from peer-reviewed behavioral science, not productivity culture, not motivational frameworks, not generic advice about habits. The minimum viable action shrink comes from BJ Fogg's Tiny Habits research program at Stanford's Behavior Design Lab. And before you dismiss it as too simple, understand what it actually does inside your nervous system. Fogg spent a decade studying over 40,000 people across habit coaching cohorts and found one consistent pattern. The brain does not evaluate whether an action is useful or meaningful before deciding whether to allow it. It evaluates perceived effort and perceived stakes. If either crosses a threshold, the shutdown begins. His finding was that shrinking a target behavior to its smallest physically possible unit drops the action below that threshold entirely. Not because the task becomes easier, but because it stops registering as a threat worth protecting against. Here is exactly what you do today, not this week. Today, open a blank document. Type only the working title of your faceless video, the one you already have, the one sitting in the back of your mind while you are reading this and nothing else. Save it, close it. You are done. The script does not exist yet. The file does. That is not a small version of the real task. That is the real task, because what your brain needed to survive was proof that you can initiate without catastrophe following immediately after. You become the person who opens documents, not the person who thinks about opening them. But here is what this solution alone cannot fix. The file exists now. Tomorrow evening arrives, you sit back down. and your brain has no instructions for what happens next. The blank page problem just moved one day forward. Implementation intention injection comes from Peter Gallwitzer at New York University, and it solves a completely different layer of the problem than what you just did. What you did with the file was prove to your brain that initiation is survivable. What Gallwitzer identified is that survivable initiation still collapses without a situational trigger, because at the moment of action, your brain re-enters deliberative appraisal. It starts weighing. It starts negotiating. And negotiation, when the stakes feel high, almost always ends in deferral. His 1999 meta-analysis in American Psychologist, replicated across 94 studies with a combined sample exceeding 8,000 people, found that forming a specific if-then plan. When situation X occurs, I will do behavior Y. Increases follow through by approximately 200 to 300% compared to goal intention alone. The mechanism is not motivation. It is that the cue triggers the behavior automatically before deliberation gets a vote. So here is what you write down right now, in this exact format, on paper or in your phone notes. When I sit down at my desk after dinner tonight, I will open a blank Google Doc and type one sentence describing who my video is for. Not a paragraph, not a plan, one sentence. Pin that note somewhere you will physically see it before that moment arrives. On your laptop lid, your kitchen counter, your phone lock screen. You now have an initiation proof from yesterday and a wired trigger for tonight. That is 2 layers of the same wall removed. But there is a third layer neither of these touches. And it is the one that has been quietly making both of them harder all along. Identity decoupling, process label swap, comes from Christopher Bryan at the University of Texas at Austin, and it targets something neither of the first 2 solutions can reach. The file-proved initiation is survivable. The if-then plan wires the trigger so deliberation does not get a vote. But underneath both of those is a label you have been carrying into every session without realizing it, and that label is the reason even small actions still feel heavy. Bryan's 2014 study, published in the Journal of Experimental Social Psychology, found that when people attach an outcome-based identity to an action, I am becoming a YouTuber, the brain registers every attempt as a test of whether that identity is true. One bad session is not a bad session. It is evidence against the self. Process labels break that entirely. I am someone who writes rough drafts is not falsifiable in a single sitting. You cannot fail at being someone who writes rough drafts by writing a rough draft. The threat evaporates because there is nothing left to lose. So before you open any scripting tool today, write this down physically. I write rough drafts. Rough drafts are allowed to be bad. Say it out loud once. Then open the doc. You are not starting a channel today. You are writing one rough draft today. Those are neurologically different tasks, and your nervous system knows the difference even when your conscious mind pretends it does not. The person who does all 3 of these things is not someone who finally got motivated. They are someone who stopped waiting for permission from their own brain and chose to act inside the discomfort anyway. That is the line. You just crossed it. The script does not need to be finished today. It needs to exist. Open the doc, write one sentence that is allowed to be wrong, and close it if you want. That is the whole ask. Every technique in this video exists to shrink the stakes down to something your nervous system can actually move through. The niche is chosen. The keyword is saved. The only thing standing between you and week 1 of watch hours is one action small enough that your nervous system stops raising its hand. You already know what to do. That was never the problem. Now you know why you weren't doing it. You are not someone who can't start. You are someone who didn't yet have the framework that makes starting possible. That changes everything.